Thank you. Infogard is the biggest pure security player in Switzerland. We are in the market since 2001. We have more than 230 security experts located in Switzerland, Austria, and Germany. Our mission is to protect customers with a 360-degree perspective on all aspects of cybersecurity. Our Cyber Defense Center offers since 2015 a 7x24 setup. We have over 300 contracts, including incident response retainers and managed detection and response services, or so-called SOC services. We are qualified from the German BSI and a first member. We are proud to say that all our 7x24 MDR customers had no substantial business impact since 2015 so far. Good, so let's come to the main topic, cybercrime today. Cybercrime has now grown into a major social problem. It not only affects companies, but also us as private individuals. The threat situation is constantly increasing, as we see from our incident response experiences. The internet is the backbone for this lucrative and illegal business case. Let's just think about the potential of this business case. We are talking about every single person with an internet access on Earth. We have nowadays more than 5.4 billion people with internet access. That means that we also have that amount of potential customers if we take the perspective of a threat actor, or victims if we take the perspective of us as defenders. Moving on, let's look at our entry point statistics. A successful attack has always an initial access. We differentiate between A1 to A5 in our own incident response cases. That's what we see on the left side of this diagram. We see some interesting trends over time if we look closer to our data points. On one hand, the vulnerabilities as initial access vectors are decreasing from 50% in 2021 down to 24% in 2023. And on the other hand, phishing-related entry points are increasing from 22% to 46% last year. In terms of vulnerabilities as initial access points, we see that the threat actors are focusing on vulns in remote access solutions. The threat actors are acting fast if a remote access related vulnerability is reported. A good example were the Ivanti vulnerability this year or the Citrix vulnerabilities the last couple of months. Let's have a look to the unsecure service exposed. Almost all cases are related to a remote access solution, which is not protected securely. We talk often about inexisting MFA features. Here we see more or less a stable situation over the last 3 years. To expand on the fact that cyber attacks are increasing, here are some more statistics. The threat situation is increasing as we can see over time. 25% of the cases, of the 260 cases in 2023 are coming from insurance companies or loss adjusters. The insurance companies report a similar picture to us in terms of growth. So we had a growth of 65% last year in compared to 2022. 2023 was a bad year for the insurance industry based on a statement from Munich Re. Threat actors are taking every opportunity, and IT infrastructure are getting more and more complex. So we are running into a bigger problem. This recent case with the ID 727 from our incident response team shows us an interesting fact. The adversary was looking for Citrix access and found instead a raccoon stealer linked to a large enterprise. Raccoon stealers is a malware family which is abusing passwords which are stored in the browsers. So the threat actors had a specific plan and changed his plan during his investigation in the darknet. We see often that threat actors are focusing explicit on remote access solutions. In this case, the threat actor changed his plan and ransomed the enterprise with a yearly revenue of 800 million euros with 5,000 US dollars. The low extortion amount prompted the company to pay, as it would have been much more expensive to handle a public discussed data exfiltration case. We can say adversaries are changing their plans based on the opportunity. If we look at the cybercrime supply chain, we can divide the attackers into different groups. On the left side, we see the remote access brokers. They sell access with a long tail strategy. One example is this recent print screen from the Russian market. We see here RDP access sales for $6 to $10. The initial access brokers brings in more context and also more capabilities to the compromised environment to be able to sell the access to a higher price. Ransomware operators with its affiliates are specialized to exfiltrate data and encrypt systems. The ideal entry point is a remote access solution. One of the sweet spots for threat actors are remote access solutions, and they take all opportunities to monetize problems related to remote access solutions. To go back to my early point, let's have a look to the honeypot perspective on cyber attacks. The Teapot Honeypot project detected in the last entire months 550 million attacks. 40% were targeting remote access TCP/IP ports, the VNC and the RDP ports to be precise. That incredible fact shows that one of the threat actors' focus is on remote access solutions. We have to reduce our attack surface. Sam, how can SCION help?
Thank you so much, Ernesto, for these insights. It's always fascinating to see how professional and streamlined these organized crime organizations are by now. And yeah, thanks for setting the stage. How SCION can help in that regard. In more specifically in reducing the attack surface. Let me first make a little bit of a detour for the listeners that have not really heard of SCION before and explain to you a little bit what SCION is and how it works before then coming to the use case of how it helps you reduce the attack surface. So SCION is a new internet architecture. It's not an idea that we had just overnight, but by now it has been more than a decade that research at ETH Zurich, also at Anapaya, at several other universities have gone into this new internet architecture. Now, what makes SCION great? There are three main pillars, I like to call them. And first and foremost, there is this notion of path control together with multipathing. Path control allows you, the sender, to decide not only where a packet should go, like the destination, that's what you can do today as well, of course, but also exactly how it should get there, right? And a sender can do so by choosing a path that is being offered to them from the network. So let's say the network offers 10 different paths to a destination. The sender can choose any one of these 10 to use. Of course, together with multipathing, that means that you can use multiple paths at the same time. This leads to incredible reliability in data transfers. Again, to come back to this example with the 10 different paths, imagine if any of these 10 paths work, your data will get from A to B without any interruption, because SCION will just simply multiplex over these different paths, immediately fade over to a working path if one doesn't work anymore, and your applications don't even realize that on the network layer something actually broke. So that's path control and multipathing that gives you an extremely reliable network and also an extremely controllable network. Because of course now with multipath, with path control, you can also define policies such as, well, my extremely critical or security sensitive traffic should never leave certain jurisdictions, right? Should never go outside European networks, for example, or Swiss networks, or should never enter US networks, for example. All of these things are now possible if you not only control the destination, but also the path. I lingered on this the most because this is the most important aspect of SCION, is path control. There are two other very central pillars. One is the notion of an isolation domain. An isolation domain groups different networks in this SCION internet, we call them autonomous systems, together and kind of unifies them under one single trust and also governance framework. The isolation domains, you can think of them as being country specific. So for example, there's a Swiss isolation domain because Switzerland defines a governance and a jurisdiction also for disputes, but also for values and the operator community that know each other. But you can also think of isolation domains as being more industry specific. So we also have examples like the Secure Swiss Finance Network. That is an isolation domain that is purpose-built for the finance sector, for financial institutions here in Switzerland and the ones that are interacting with those institutions. Right, that's an isolation domain. And then there is the inherent security and trust in the network, right? What good is a network that gives you path control if you cannot establish any trust in those paths? So that means every path is actually cryptographically secured. If I get a path from the network, I can verify who is on that path to establish A, trust in that path, and B, that I can be sure that nobody that is not on this path can divert my traffic, right? If I want my traffic to go through these network hops, it will go through those network hops, and it cannot be diverted by a third party. So that's what SCION is about on the high level. How is it being deployed in actuality, right? Because a new network architecture, that's difficult to actually roll out and deploy. There are two main aspects to this. One is the SCION backbone that you can see here at the center. The SCION backbone network is a network of networks, just like the ordinary internet, that is run by a federation of internet service providers, network operators, carriers that deploy what we call SCION routers in their networks, right? And these SCION routers, you can think of them as like waypoints on a SCION path. So when you choose a path for your packet to take, it's essentially the equivalent of a sequence of these routers, right? That are operated by these backbone ISPs. That's the core of the network. And then at the edge, at the user side, we have a piece that makes it possible that all existing applications can use a SCION network, right? Imagine SCION is kind of like a new language, and your existing application and your existing infrastructure, it does not understand this new language. So what we did is we developed an application on top of SCION, basically, IP and SCION tunneling, that bridges this gap or translates between the traditional IP-based networking that is used today and a SCION network. And it simply takes the SCION packet, right? It then checks where does this packet need to go? And there is a translation between an IP address and the destination SCION network. And once that destination in the SCION network is clear, then the whole path selection process comes into play, where a most optimal path is tried and used. depending on the application, depending on the use case, of course. And all of this comes in different form factors. So we have this edge gateway, that is the classical on-premise or virtualized router that you have to connect your site, be it a virtual site or a physical site, to the SCION network. So they act as basically a router or a gateway into the SCION network. It takes your IP traffic, it tunnels it through the SCION network, and it makes optimal path decisions based on configuration also that you give it. And then another form factor, and this is then for users actually, is the gate. The gate is basically an edge, like an edge, but run by the ISP. And all users in that ISP's network can now get an entry into the SCION network, right? So from the user's device at home or on the way, traffic will normally leave the device, go into this gate, SCION gate, and from there it's in the SCION network and gets routed to the destination. That's at the very high level how this is being rolled out. And here in Switzerland, for example, we have the SCION backbone that is provided by the big service providers. Swisscom is in there, Sunrise is in there, Switch, Cyberlink. Internationally, we have Intercloud and Colt that are adopting this. And these are the SCION backbone providers that spawn this network. And they're also running a gate infrastructure for the residential users, right? And then the organizations, banks, critical infrastructure like hospital or the government, they're deploying these edge gateways on their premises or in their private clouds to connect their sites to the SCION network. Okay, now with that, let's focus on a specific use case, how you can now use this setup, this infrastructure, to basically prevent the distributed denial of service attacks and these intrusion attempts to your critical services and infrastructure. It's basically very simple, right? You have the service that you operate, be it a remote access service. Let's say it's a remote access service. If here in the HQ, we have this VPN access point where your remote employees, for example, connect to, or you could also have in the cloud an API or a service that you run, and you put this behind an edge gateway, right? Just that it's accessible in the SCION network. And now what you can do is leverage the gate infrastructure that has been built, right? The gate infrastructure here in Switzerland is operated by Swisscom, Sunrise, the two big ones that amongst them cover roughly 80% of the user base of Switzerland. And then a gate infrastructure operated by Anapaya at the Swiss Internet Exchange Point that basically covers the rest of the Swiss internet population. And now you as a service provider or a service operator can decide, okay, my service should be visible in exactly these gates, or maybe just a subset of these gates. And that means that all users that are part of that network, for example, all Swisscom users, can access your VPN endpoint. But if you're outside of the Swisscom network, you cannot anymore. And that crucially means your remote access is not visible anymore on the public internet, right? So to be a bit figurative, imagine there are 8 billion people. And if you put something on the internet, roughly 8 billion, potentially 8 billion people could access it, right? You try then to keep them out with firewalling, with geo IP blocking, with web application firewalls, all kind of different mechanisms to reduce that set. Now, if with this solution here, you can basically say, well, my service, instead of putting it on the internet and then try to keep bad actors out, I have it by default not available, right? And I selectively make it available on certain gates. Now, the gate infrastructure is available here in Switzerland and will soon be also available more internationally. We're working on Germany and France, but you can decide where your service should be visible, right? And that's then basically saying, well, my service is now visible to 8 million people instead of 8 billion people, or even more fine-grained. And that's, of course, a paradigm shift, right? Instead of making it accessible by default and then trying to keep stuff out, you control where it's accessible. And that will reduce your attack surface by 99.9% easily, right? And that, in turn, of course, reduces your risk of being a victim of an attack. It's very hard to mount a distributed denial of service attack from within Switzerland or from within the Swisscom network. It's very easy to identify. It's hard to compromise enough hosts to mount such an attack. And if it happens, it's very easy to shut down because it just comes from one location, right? It's not distributed all over the internet. Similarly, for these intrusion attempts, the attacker now has to be in a whitelisted network of yours, right? And only then they can come in. Of course, this is not an absolute guarantee, but it's a very, very effective measure to drastically reduce your attack surface. With that being said, I know I talk a lot now how it works, but we also collected some numbers because this is being actively used today in production for critical infrastructure. One example is a Swiss bank that has been using this now for over a year. And this year actually switched to only use the gate infrastructure for their remote employees. They were running in parallel their VPN access infrastructure on the internet and on the SCION internet through the gate infrastructure. And then they were collecting data about what comes in, right? And you get a lot of scans. You see in one quarter in 2023, they got 9 million scans. These are port scans, what ports are open, what applications might be running, fingerprinting attempts, etc. So this is not very critical. It's basically reconnaissance. But they also then classified what are now malicious attempts to intrude in their system, be it trying out access credentials or specifically sending payloads that you know are related to a certain vulnerability that has been out there and that might not have been patched, right? And they had almost 90K of these really malicious attempts that they classified and saw in this one quarter. While in the same time on the infrastructure that was exposed to the SCION internet, they had multiple orders of magnitudes less scans because it's just not so visible, right? Of course, there are also scans from within Switzerland, but just much, much, much less. And malicious attacks are exactly zero. Now, this zero, it's not an absolute guarantee that you get zero. It happened to be zero in this quarter. Maybe you get a few, but this just shows how effective this is to reduce your attack surface, right? And all of this without doing anything on their home user side, right? They use the exact same VPN client on the exact same operating system, the exact same software, no reconfiguration needed, and it just works. Similarly, we also installed, actually in collaboration with InfoGuard, a honeypot that we exposed on the internet and through the gate on the SCION internet. And that honeypot basically acts as a infrastructure to attract potential attackers. Of course, it's completely fake, right? It presents itself as a web server, as a vulnerable web server, or a vulnerable or an open SSH client server. And we just also here counted what kind of how many intrusion attempts and what kind of intrusion attempts we get over 2 months, end of last year. A similar picture here, the one that was exposed to the public internet, you have over 150K. And these are really intrusion attempts. These were not just merely the scans. On the SCION internet, we had exactly 3. Just to give you an idea how much this attack surface is reduced. But this is not the only upside of the gate infrastructure. It's one of the big ones, reducing your attack surface. But then also, once you're in the SCION internet, of course, you benefit from the extreme reliability of the SCION internet itself, right? The multipathing that I showed, that I explained. From the gate and from each provider here has redundant gate setups. Each provider has redundant SCION peerings into the SCION internet. And that leads basically to easily 40, 50 diverse paths between the gates and the target destination. It's basically an always-on network, right? What you see here is an evaluation we did as part of the secure finance network that we evaluated before its go live in 2022. Where we basically introduced all kinds of failure into the system, be it link failures, being entire core routers that stop working, all the way to an entire service provider actually is completely offline. And none of this actually impacted anything on the application level. So point here being, not only do you get a reduced attack surface, but you also get a much more reliable experience in terms of connectivity from the gates once your users are in the gate to your service. And with that, I'd like to conclude the gate, the Anapaya gate. It's all about reducing your attack surface. Putting your service behind this gate infrastructure makes it invisible to the rest of the internet. And even with that path control, you can control who gets access to your path information. You can even hide it within the SCION internet, right? So it's always secure, it's always on, and it's really simple because your clients, your users, they don't have to install anything on their end. They keep using whatever they've been using, be it a VPN client or be it a browser if it's a website that you want to protect. And yeah, what cannot be seen cannot be attacked, basically. That's my conclusion. Ernesto.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you, Sam. I can just say we can help you when it counts. Our highly experienced experts are there for you 24/7.
Great. And with that, we are at the end of the Q&A of the main content, and we would like to open up the